Caleb Whitmore tore the bank letter in half before he finished reading it. Not because he didn't understand the words, because he understood them perfectly. 60 days. Pay what you owe or lose every acre your father bled to build. He stood alone in the kitchen, his wife once filled with the smell of biscuits and laughter, and he made the only decision a man with nothing left makes. He would take a wife he had never met. He would save the land. And he would feel nothing. He was wrong on that last part. Before we go any further, if stories about quiet strength, second chances, and love that nobody saw coming speak to your heart, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Wyoming Territory, 1882. The letter had taken 3 weeks to reach Clara Bennett, which was 3 weeks longer than she had left. She read it twice, standing in the narrow hallway of the boarding house in Cheyenne, the paper creasing between her fingers where she gripped it too hard. The handwriting was plain. No decoration, no persuasion. Just the facts laid bare the way a man lays out tools before a job he isn't sure he can finish. My name is Caleb Whitmore. I own land outside of Hatcher's Creek, Wyoming Territory. 140 acres. Cattle. A house that needs work. I am 34 years old. I was married before. My wife passed 4 years ago. I am not looking for sentiment or pretense. I need a wife who can work alongside me and keep a home. I will provide security, respect, and my word that no harm will come to you under my roof. If this arrangement suits you, the stagecoach runs Tuesday out of Cheyenne. I will be at the depot in Hatcher's Creek. C. Whitmore. That was all. No flattery. No promises beyond the practical ones. No attempt to make himself sound like anything other than exactly what he was, a man in need, and too honest to hide it. Clara folded the letter and slid it into her coat pocket. She had received 4 other letters that month. One from a widower in Colorado who had described himself as a man of considerable means and listed his requirements for a wife the way a man lists requirements for livestock. One from a farmer in Nebraska who had written 3 sentences and then added a postscript that said she should know he had a temper, but it was manageable. One from a merchant in Kansas who had enclosed a photograph of himself and written, "I hope you are as pretty as your description suggests," along the bottom in red ink. She had burned all 3. The 4th letter had come from a matchmaking service in Denver and smelled of rose water and false hope. She had not bothered to answer it. But Caleb Whitmore's letter she had read twice, and then a 3rd time. There was something in its plainness that felt more trustworthy than all the performance of the others. A man who made no promises he wasn't certain he could keep. A man who named his grief plainly. My wife passed 4 years ago without either wallowing in it or pretending it hadn't happened. Clara had spent enough time around men who performed their feelings to recognize something genuine when it arrived without decoration. She packed her one traveling case that evening. She did not tell the woman who ran the boarding house where she was going. She did not send word to anyone in Cheyenne who might carry news of her direction back to people she had worked very hard to leave behind. She paid what she owed for the room, thanked the woman at the desk, and was on the Tuesday stagecoach before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridgeline. She did not look back. She had learned a long time ago that looking back was how you got caught. The ride to Hatcher's Creek took the better part of 2 days, with a stop overnight at a relay station outside of a town so small it didn't appear to have a name on any sign she could find. She shared the coach with a young couple who argued quietly the entire first day, and then stopped speaking to one another entirely by morning. She shared it with a heavy-set man in a wool suit who slept most of the journey and snored with remarkable dedication. She shared it with an older woman, perhaps 60, who knitted without pause and occasionally looked at Clara with an expression that might have been pity or might have been recognition. Clara couldn't decide which. On the second afternoon, somewhere between the relay station and Hatcher's Creek, the older woman set down her knitting and said without preamble, "You running toward something or away from it, child?" Clara looked at her. "Both," she said honestly. The woman nodded as though that was the only sensible answer and picked her knitting back up. She didn't ask anything else for the remainder of the journey. Clara found herself grateful in a way she hadn't expected. Hatcher's Creek was smaller than Cheyenne, but larger than quiet. Main Street ran maybe 4 blocks before it gave out to open land. A general store. A hotel that looked like it had seen better decades. A church with white paint that was slowly losing its argument with the Wyoming weather. A saloon that appeared to be doing more business than everything else combined. A barber shop. A land office with its shingles swinging in the afternoon wind. The stagecoach pulled up in front of the depot, and Clara stepped down before the driver had finished setting the brake. She stood on the planked sidewalk with her traveling case in one hand and the afternoon sun cutting at a low angle across the street, and she looked around for a man who fit the shape of someone who had written that letter. She found him almost immediately. He was standing at the edge of the depot's shadow, not in the center of things, not putting himself forward. Tall, lean in the way that comes from work and not from ease. Dark hair going slightly long beneath a hat that had lived through several seasons. A jaw that needed attention from a razor. Clothes that were clean, but not dressed up a man who had made an effort without making a performance of it. He was watching her the way a person watches something they're not certain is real. Clara walked toward him directly. She had long since stopped seeing the use in hesitating. "You must be Caleb Whitmore," she said. He removed his hat. The gesture was instinctive, and she noticed it, the kind of manners that live in the bones rather than the mind. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was low and careful, the kind of voice that didn't waste itself. "And you're Miss Bennett." "Clara," she said. "If we're going to be married, ma'am, seems like more distance than we can afford." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to be a cousin of one. "Clara," he repeated as though testing whether it fit in his mouth. There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but was honest in the way silences can be when two people are looking at each other and both recognizing that this moment is stranger than either of them had fully prepared for. Then Caleb said, "My wagon's just around the side, if you're ready." "I am," Clara said. She picked up her traveling case before he could reach for it. He noticed that too. She could tell by the slight adjustment in his expression, not offended, just noting, recording, the way a careful man catalogs information. They walked around to the wagon without speaking. He helped her up onto the seat with a brief offered hand that she took without ceremony, and then he went around to his own side, and they pulled out of Hatcher's Creek with the late afternoon light stretching long across the grass on either side of the road. For a while, neither of them said anything. Clara had learned that silences with men told you more than conversations did. A man who felt the need to fill every silence with his own voice was a man who needed to control what you thought of him. A man who could sit quietly beside someone he had just met was a man who was comfortable enough in himself not to perform. Caleb Whitmore drove his horse and watched the road and let the silence exist without wrestling with it. Clara noted this and said nothing. After perhaps 20 minutes, he said, "The house needs more work than I described in the letter." "Describe it now," Clara said. He glanced at her sideways. "The roof on the east side has a section that needs replacing before winter. 2 of the fence lines on the northern pasture are down. The kitchen needs—" He paused. "It needs attention." "What kind of attention?" "The stove draws wrong. The window on the south wall doesn't close properly. Some of the shelving is unsound. Can you fix the stove?" "I know how to fix the stove," Caleb said. "I've been." Another pause, shorter than the first. "There are things I've let go longer than I should have." Clara understood what he wasn't saying. A man alone with no reason to keep the kitchen running at its best, letting things accumulate the way grief accumulates when you stop paying attention to it. "We'll make a list," she said. "Everything that needs doing. We'll work through it." He looked at her again, that same sideways consideration. "You know ranch work?" "I know hard work," Clara said. "Ranch work, I'll learn." "It isn't easy." "I didn't come to Wyoming for easy." He turned his eyes back to the road and didn't say anything for another mile. And then he said quietly, almost to himself, "No, I don't imagine you did." They reached Whitmore Ranch as the sun was dropping toward the western edge of the land. The house was larger than she had expected, and in worse condition than his modest description had suggested. The barn needed paint from top to bottom. One of the corral gates hung at an angle that suggested the hinge had given up the fight some time ago. The yard between the house and the barn was functional rather than tended, but the land itself, the broad sweep of it in the fading light, the grass bending in the evening wind, the way the sky came down to meet it on every side, that was something else entirely. Clara stood beside the wagon after he helped her down and looked at it for a moment without speaking. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant the land, and she thought he understood. She meant the land because he looked out at it too for a moment, with an expression that was complicated and tender at once. "My father built it," Caleb said. "Started with 40 acres and a loan, and a great deal of stubbornness. Added the rest over 20 years. And now it's yours." "For now it's mine," he said, and something in his voice went flat and careful in a way that told her there was more to that sentence than he was offering right now. She let it stand. He showed her the house. It was spare and male in the way houses get when a man lives alone in them long enough, not dirty exactly, but emptied of softness. The kitchen was exactly as he had described it, though she thought his description had been generous. The main room had a fireplace that at least appeared to be structurally sound, and 2 chairs that had probably once been a set of 4. There was a table that had been built to seat more people than currently occupied the house. He showed her the room that would be hers, a small space off the main hallway, with a bed and a chest of drawers, and a window that faced east. "I'll let you get settled," he said from the doorway. "I can put something together for supper if—" "I'll cook," Clara said. She set her traveling case on the bed. "Show me what you have in the kitchen." He stood in the doorway for a moment, as though recalibrating some expectation. Then he said, "All right." What he had in the kitchen was modest but workable. Salt pork. Dried beans that needed soaking, but she could make do without the full soaking if she managed the time right. Cornmeal. Coffee, which she was grateful for. Some potatoes gone slightly soft, but still useful. She found a jar of preserved tomatoes on a shelf at the back that he seemed to have forgotten was there. She got to work without ceremony. Caleb sat at the kitchen table and watched her move through the space with the uncertain expression of a man who hasn't seen someone else inhabit his kitchen in long enough that he's not sure how to be in it when someone else is present. "You don't have to watch," Clara said, not unkindly. "I'm not—" He stopped. "I suppose I am," he admitted. "I apologize." "I don't mind it," she said. "I just want you to know you're allowed to do something else. There isn't much else to do at this hour." He paused. "I could tell you more about the ranch, about how things work, what a day looks like." "Tell me," Clara said. And so he did. He talked about the cattle, which numbered 63 at last countdown from 112, when his father had still been alive. He talked about the pasture rotation, and the water situation, and the particular quality of the Wyoming winters that a person from further east couldn't fully appreciate until they'd survived one. He talked about the 2 neighbors whose land adjoined his, a man named Gus Pullman to the north, who had been a friend of his father's and still showed up occasionally when something needed more than 2 hands, and a family named Driscoll to the south who kept mostly to themselves. Clara listened and asked questions that were practical and specific: water source distance to town, whether the cattle were branded, and Caleb answered them with something that looked increasingly like relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying information alone for a long time, and is surprised to find someone who wants to receive it. She put supper on the table, and they ate across from each other in the lamplight with the Wyoming night pressing at the windows. After a while, Caleb said, "You're not what I expected." Clara looked at him over her coffee cup. "What did you expect?" He considered this with the same careful honesty she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. Someone more— he searched for the word— uncertain. Uncertain. About the situation, about being here, about— He gestured slightly, indicating the kitchen, the house, the general arrangement of things. "I've been uncertain plenty," Clara said. "I just don't find it useful to wear it on my face." He studied her for a moment. "Where are you from, Clara, originally?" She had prepared for this question. She had a version of the answer that was true enough to be credible and incomplete enough to be safe. "Missouri," she said. "A small town in the western part of the state. My parents passed when I was young. I've been managing on my own for some years." "What kind of managing?" "Teaching for a time. Bookkeeping. Whatever the situation called for." He nodded slowly. "The matchmaking service in Denver." "I wrote to them," Clara said. "They connected me with several men. Your letter was the only one I answered." He seemed to want to ask why, but had enough courtesy not to push at it directly. She appreciated that. "I'm glad you answered it," he said finally. The words came out sounding like they surprised him slightly, like he had meant to say something more formal, and those were the words that arrived instead. "So am I," Clara said, and found that she meant it, which surprised her too. They washed up together after supper without discussing it. She washed, he dried, and it was so ordinary and so strange at once that Clara had to consciously keep her hands busy so she wouldn't stand there and think too carefully about what it meant to be sharing a kitchen with a man she had known for 4 hours. At the door of her room that night, Caleb said, "I want to say something before we—" He stopped, tried again. "I know what this arrangement is, Clara. I know what we both came to it needing. I don't intend to take advantage of the situation, or to—" He stopped again, and she could see him looking for the right words the way a man feels for footing in the dark. "I understand," she said gently. "I trust the letter you wrote." He looked at her with something that might have been gratitude and might have been something more complicated. "Good night, then." "Good night, Caleb." She closed the door and stood in the small room with the east-facing window and the bed that smelled of fresh linen he had put out. Fresh linen for her, she noted, which was a detail she filed carefully alongside the hat removal and the waiting at the edge of shadows rather than the center of things. She did not unpack her traveling case entirely that first night. Old habit. She told herself it was only old habit. The wedding took place 3 days later at the county courthouse in Hatcher's Creek, with the county clerk as witness, and a second witness pulled in from the land office next door, who shook Caleb's hand afterward and looked at Clara with an expression she recognized as the one people wore when they were trying to figure out what a woman like her was doing with a situation like this. She had been receiving that expression since the day the stagecoach pulled in. She had seen it in the mercantile when Caleb brought her in to introduce her and settle accounts. The proprietor's wife, a narrow-faced woman named Edna Pruitt, had looked Clara up and down with the particular thoroughness of a woman cataloging competition rather than assessing character. She had seen it from the group of men outside the saloon who had watched the wagon pass with the specific attention of men who didn't have enough to occupy their minds. She had seen it from the pastor's wife at the church, who had approached her after the Sunday service with excessive warmth and asked questions about her background with the persistence of someone conducting an investigation. Hatcher's Creek was the kind of small town where people believed that the business of their neighbors was also their business, and the arrival of a woman like Clara was, by the standards of the town, extraordinary enough to warrant sustained inquiry. Clara smiled at all of it. She answered what she chose to answer. She kept her eyes pleasant and her words agreeable, and she gave away nothing that she wasn't prepared to give. But in the wagon, on the way home from the courthouse with the marriage certificate folded in Caleb's coat pocket, she said, "Mrs. Pruitt doesn't believe I married you for honest reasons." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Edna Pruitt doesn't believe most things that don't originate inside her own head. She thinks I'm after something. Edna has thought that about every woman who's arrived in this county in the last decade that she didn't personally know since birth." His voice was dry and even. She thought the same about the school teacher who came 2 years ago. That woman turned out to be the finest teacher Hatcher's Creek has had, and is now married to the banker, and Edna has yet to acknowledge that any of her original suspicions were incorrect. Clara looked at the side of his face. "Does it bother you? What people say?" He was quiet for a moment. "It bothered me more when I was younger," he said. "I've come to understand that what people say generally tells you more about them than it does about you. That's a wise position." "It's an earned one," he said, and left it at that. The days that followed established themselves into a rhythm that Clara found to her own surprise comfortable. Not easy, never easy, but comfortable in the way that useful work is comfortable with the satisfaction of tasks begun and completed, and the specific pleasure of learning something new each day. She learned which of the horses needed the most patience and which one would take liberties if you let him. She learned how Caleb organized the feed stores and the particular logic of his system, which was not immediately obvious, but revealed itself to have an internal consistency once she paid enough attention. She learned that the stove did indeed draw wrong, and that the fix was a matter of adjusting the damper plate and cleaning a section of the flue that had accumulated blockage, a job she accomplished herself while Caleb was out with the cattle, and which he noticed that evening without comment beyond looking at the stove and then looking at her with an expression that she was beginning to read as his particular form of approval. She learned that he woke before dawn and that he worked without complaint, and that he was in the fundamental way that mattered most, a man who kept his word. Everything he had said in that letter had been true. Security, respect, no harm under his roof. These were not performances. They were simply the way he operated. She had not expected that. She had prepared herself for some version of disappointment because disappointment had been the consistent texture of her experience with men who made promises. What she had not prepared herself for was the quiet discovery that some promises held. She was not naive enough to call it comfort yet, but she was honest enough to notice it. 3 weeks into her life at Whitmore Ranch, Clara found the bank letters. She wasn't searching for them. She was reorganizing the shelf in the main room, where Caleb kept his papers, a task she had proposed, because the shelf was in a state of accumulated disorder that was going to become a problem come tax season, and the letters were there among the ordinary papers, tucked without any particular concealment beneath a ledger book. She pulled them out and read the first one, then the second, then the third, which was the most recent, dated 6 weeks before her arrival. She sat down in one of the 2 chairs by the fireplace. The debt was not a secret Caleb had mentioned. The bank's pressure in their second week in a general way. The way you mention a persistent problem without going into the specifics. But the specifics, now that she had them in her hands, were different from the general mention. The bank held a note on the ranch land that Caleb's father had taken out years ago to expand the acreage, and the payments had fallen behind. The most recent letter used the word foreclosure with the calm certainty of a document that has already decided the outcome. 60 days, the letter said. Pay the arrears or the proceedings begin. That letter was dated 6 weeks ago, which meant they were down to 2 weeks. Clara put the letters back exactly where she had found them. She finished reorganizing the shelf. She put supper on. She waited. At dinner, when Caleb had cleared most of his plate and the conversation had settled into the comfortable quiet they had begun to find together, Clara set down her fork and said, "I found the bank letters." He went very still. Not defensive, she noted that. Just still, the way a man goes still when something he has been carrying alone is suddenly visible to someone else. "I wasn't looking for them," she added. "I know." His voice was level. "I should have told you sooner." "Yes," Clara said. "You should have. How much time do we have?" He looked at her across the table, some calculation happening behind his eyes. 2 weeks approximately. "And the arrears?" "More than I have." Clara nodded slowly. "How much more?" He told her. The number was large but not impossible. Not with the right moves and enough hustle, and the kind of focused effort that came from 2 people working at a problem instead of 1. "The cattle we have due for market," Clara said. "When a month after next, maybe less if the weather holds. What about the Driscoll land to the south? Have you ever spoken with them about a grazing arrangement? Temporary access to your northern pasture in exchange for—" "I haven't." He paused. "I hadn't thought about it from that angle." "There are also the fence repairs on the northern line," Clara continued. "If that pasture is usable, its value changes. If it's not bounded properly, it's worthless on paper. Caleb was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Something that was starting to be something more than just careful assessment. "I can keep books," she said. "If you'll let me look at everything, full accounts, every debt, every asset, I can tell you what we're actually working with. Not a guess. Numbers." "You said you did bookkeeping," he said slowly. "I did it for 3 years for a trading company in Kansas City," Clara said, which was true, and also happened to be the part of her history she had no particular need to obscure. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might push back. Men sometimes pushed back when a woman offered something too useful too quickly, as though the offering itself was a challenge to something they needed to protect. But Caleb said, "All right." Just that, "all right." "In the morning," she said. "We'll start in the morning." He nodded, and then after a moment he said, "Clara, I should have told you about this before the courthouse. You had a right to know what you were walking into." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said again. "You should have." He absorbed the honesty of that without flinching. "I'm sorry." "I know you are." She picked up her fork. "Don't do it again." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but its architecture. "No," he said quietly. "I won't." They finished supper in the particular silence of two people who have just told each other something true and are both adjusting to what that means. The next morning, Clara was at the table with his accounts before he came in from the early chores. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her without comment, and watched her work through the numbers with the clean efficiency of someone who had spent years making sense of other people's disordered finances. She worked for 2 hours while he dealt with the morning feeding. When he came back in, she had the full picture laid out on 3 sheets of paper in a handwriting that was clear and organized, and she walked him through it with the directness of someone presenting facts and not judgments. The situation was not as catastrophic as the bank letter's formal language had made it sound. It was serious. It required attention and luck and the right sequence of decisions. But it was not over. "If we sell the 4 head that aren't going to make it through another hard winter anyway," Clara said, pointing to the relevant column that covers the most pressing arrears. "It buys time. Not enough time by itself, but combined with the Driscoll conversation and moving the main cattle drive up by 3 weeks. "Moving the drive up is a risk," Caleb said. He was leaning over the table now, following her columns. "If the weather doesn't hold, what's the range historically for the weather turning in this part of Wyoming?" he told her. She did the calculation in her head and put a number on the paper. "The risk is real," she said, "but it's smaller than the risk of waiting." He studied the numbers for a long time. She watched him think this was something she had come to find interesting about him in these weeks. The visible process of it, the way he worked through things with his whole face, rather than behind a practiced blankness. "All right," he said. Again. "All right." "There's one more thing," Clara said. He looked at her. "The land office," she said carefully. "Your father's original deed. Do you have it? It's in the strong box. I need to see it." Something shifted in his expression. "Why?" Clara set down her pen. She chose her next words with the precision she had learned to apply to important things. "Because there was a man at the land office in town," she said. "The day we went in for the courthouse. I noticed him watching when we signed the register. He spoke to the clerk after we left. I saw him through the window." Caleb was very still again. "I don't know who he is," Clara said. "But I've seen that particular kind of interest before. The kind that isn't social. The kind that's looking for something specific." Caleb's jaw tightened in a way she hadn't seen before. "Describe him." She did. The man had been perhaps 50, dressed well, but not ostentatiously, with the particular quality of attention that belonged to someone conducting business he didn't want noticed. Caleb's expression went through several changes and arrived somewhere that was carefully flat. "His name is Harrison Cole," Caleb said. Clara waited. "He's been in this county for about 8 months." Caleb continued, his voice measured and low. "He's been buying land, or trying to. He made an offer on the Pullman place to the north of me last spring. Gus turned him down. He made an offer on the Driscoll land in June. A pause. He hasn't made an offer on mine yet. But he will, Clara said. Caleb looked at her. How do you know that? Because men like that don't watch a land register out of casual interest, Clara said. He was checking something, verifying something. And he watched us specifically, not just you, both of us. She paused. I need to see your father's deed, Caleb. And I need you to tell me everything your father ever said about how he acquired those additional 40 acres. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and went to get the strongbox. He came back with it and set it on the table and opened it, and they sat together in the morning light going through the documents inside the original homestead, filing the deed of expansion, the banknote, the tax records going back 15 years. Clara read each one with care. When she got to the deed of expansion, she read it twice. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, not because she was lost, but because she was thinking, and the ceiling was simply where her eyes went when she needed to think clearly. What is it? Caleb said. The survey marker on the eastern boundary of the expansion, she said. Whose survey is cited? Caleb leaned over and looked, read the name. County surveyor at the time. Man named. He read it again. Aldrich. Thomas Aldrich. Is he still the county surveyor? He passed about 6 years ago. Clara picked up the document again. The survey marker cited here does not match the legal description in the adjacent filing from 1871. She pointed to the two documents side by side. This number and this number should agree. They don't. Caleb looked at them. She watched him see it. It could be a clerical error from the time, he said slowly. But his voice said he didn't entirely believe that. It could be, Clara agreed. Or it could be a discrepancy that someone has noticed and is planning to use. She set the documents down. A discrepancy in the original survey gives a challenger grounds to contest the boundary. If the boundary is contested, the expansion acreage is in question. If the expansion acreage is in question, the entire property value changes, Caleb finished. His voice had gone flat. And the banknote becomes considerably more complicated. Clara looked at him. Has Cole been to the courthouse record room? Do you know? I don't. His jaw was tight. But I can find out. Not obviously, Clara said. Quietly, through someone you trust. He met her eyes across the table. There was something in his expression that was new. Something that was more than the careful noting she had seen from him until now. Something more urgent. Gus Pullman, he said. I trust Gus. Good, Clara said. Talk to Gus. And then, because there was still work to be done, and the morning was moving, and the cattle needed moving to the far pasture, they stood up from the table and went to do the work of the ranch side by side, with the weight of what they'd found pressing quietly between them and above them, like weather coming from the west. Neither of them spoke about how they had just, without discussion or ceremony, become something more than two strangers sharing a convenient arrangement. Neither of them needed to. Some things become real before they're spoken. Some partnerships form in the space between a ledger column and a dimly lit document, and two people leaning over a table together, deciding that what one of them is carrying is now something they're both going to carry. And some mornings change everything without announcing themselves. That morning was one of those. Gus Pullman arrived at Whitmore Ranch the following Thursday morning without being sent for. That was the thing about Gus. He had a quality that Caleb's father had once described as a nose for when a neighbor needed him, and in 30 years of living adjacent to the Whitmore land, that nose had rarely been wrong. He pulled his wagon up to the barn, climbed down with the deliberate care of a man whose knees had opinions about cold mornings, and found Caleb and Clara in the middle of mending the eastern corral fence. He stopped when he saw Clara. Not rudely. Gus Pullman had been raised with better manners than that. But there was a pause, a brief recalibration, the natural adjustment of a man who had known Caleb Whitmore in the years of grief and isolation, and was now looking at evidence that something had shifted. "You must be the new Mrs.," he said, removing his hat with the same instinct Caleb had shown at the depot. "Clara Whitmore," she said, and it was the first time she had used that name aloud to someone outside the courthouse, and she noticed briefly the way it sat in her mouth, neither wrong nor entirely familiar yet. "Gus Pullman." He put his hat back on. "Your husband's father was the best man I knew in 50 years of knowing men. I just want you to understand that from the start." "I've gathered something like that," Clara said. Gus looked at Caleb. "I heard some things in town yesterday that I think need saying." Caleb set down his fencing tool. "Come inside." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where 2 weeks of mornings had already accumulated their own particular history, and Gus accepted the coffee Clara put in front of him and folded his hands around the cup and said, "Harrison Cole has been in the courthouse record room 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Lyle Becker at the clerk's office told me. Lyle owes me a favor from some years back, and he's an honest man when he's not being pressured." "What was Cole looking at?" Caleb said. "Land deeds, survey records." Gus paused. "Specifically the filings along this ridge. Your land, the Driscoll land. Mine." Clara set her own cup down. "Did Lyle say what he found?" Gus looked at her. There was something in that look that wasn't entirely comfortable, not hostile, just the natural adjustment of a man who was used to having this conversation with Caleb alone, and was recalibrating to the fact that the conversation now had a third participant who appeared to have equal weight in it. "He said Cole spent most of his time on the 1871 expansion filings," Gus said slowly. Caleb and Clara looked at each other across the table. It was a brief look, maybe 2 seconds. But Gus caught it, and his eyes moved between them with the sharpness of a man who had spent a lifetime reading the air in rooms. "You already knew about the survey discrepancy," Gus said. It wasn't a question. "We found it last week," Caleb said. Gus was quiet for a moment. Then he set his cup down with a careful deliberateness that meant he was choosing his next words. "Cole approached me again last month. I didn't mention it before because I'd said no, and I meant no, and I didn't see the point in worrying you." He paused. "He wasn't offering to buy this time. He was asking questions about your father, about when the expansion was filed, about who witnessed the original survey." "What did you tell him?" "That I didn't recall the particulars, and he could take his questions to the courthouse." Gus's voice had gone dry. "Which evidently he did." Clara said, "What does Cole want with this particular stretch of land? Does anyone know?" Gus looked at her again. This time the look was different, more direct, more considering, as though he was deciding something about her. "There's been talk," he said, "about a rail spur. New line coming through the territory. The company hasn't announced the exact route, but there are men who know, and the word that's drifting around says it comes through this ridge." He paused. "Land along that route is going to be worth 3-4 times what it's worth today." The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb's jaw tightened in that particular way Clara had learned to read in the weeks they'd shared meals and mornings, and the gradual accumulation of trust. "He's not trying to buy us out," Caleb said. "No," Gus said. "I don't think he is. He's going to use the survey discrepancy to challenge the deed. Get the expansion acreage thrown into legal question. Then offer a settlement something low, something timed to when the bank pressure is worst. And if you can't fight the legal challenge and you can't make the bank payment," Gus finished, "the land goes one way or another and he ends up with it." Clara was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She could feel it, the particular quality of concentration that came over her when a problem resolved itself from confusion into shape. She had felt it in the courthouse record room in Kansas City years ago, going through ledgers that didn't quite add up, finding the place where the numbers stopped telling the truth. "The original survey," she said. "Who conducted it besides Aldrich? Was there a second party, a witness to the markers?" Caleb frowned. "I don't know. My father never—" He stopped. "Wait." He looked at Gus. "Old Harlan Meeks. He worked as a deputy surveyor under Aldrich for years. Gus sat up slightly. Harlan Meeks is still alive. Lives out past the Driscoll place. Must be 80 if he's a day, but last I saw him his mind was... Gus tapped the side of his head. Sharp as it ever was. Clara looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at her. Tomorrow morning, he said. Tomorrow morning? She agreed. Gus watched this exchange with an expression that had traveled over the course of the last half hour from uncertain to something that looked considerably closer to respect. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it down again. He looked at Clara directly. You're not what I expected, he said. He said it the same way Caleb had said it weeks before, but the tone was different. Where Caleb's had carried a kind of wondering adjustment, Gus's carried something more like recognition. Like a man who has seen this kind of competence before and is relieved to find it here. Nobody is generally, Clara said. Gus almost smiled. No, he said. I suppose not. He pushed back his chair. I'll ask around quietly about whether anyone else has had contact with Cole. There are 3 other ranchers on this ridge who ought to know what he's doing before he does it to them too. Carefully, Clara said. Mrs. Whitmore, Gus said, standing and putting on his hat. I have been doing things carefully in this county since before your husband was born. You can trust me on that. He left with the same unhurried directness with which he'd arrived, and Caleb and Clara sat for a moment in the kitchen after the sound of his wagon faded and the morning reorganized itself around what they'd just learned. He's going to move soon, Clara said. Cole, if he's been in the courthouse 3 times in 2 weeks, he's done his research and he's close to whatever the next step is. We need to get to Harlan Meeks before he does, Caleb said. Yes, and we need to talk to a lawyer. Caleb's expression shifted. Lawyers cost money we don't have in quantity. One conversation, Clara said. One conversation to understand what the legal challenge would look like and what our defenses are. Then we'll know what we're working with. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There's a man in Cheyenne, a friend of my father's, Edmund Farley. He's a lawyer. He's retired from most of his practice, but he still takes cases when they interest him. A pause. My father's land would interest him. Write to him today, Clara said. And then let's get back to the fence. We still have 40 yards to finish before nightfall. He looked at her for a moment. That look, she was learning the one that was more than assessment, and not yet something she had a full name for. Clara, he said. Yes. I'm glad you found those letters. She held his gaze for just a beat longer than she needed to. So am I, she said. Now come on. That fence isn't going to mend itself. The ride out to Harlan Meeks's place the next morning took the better part of an hour through land that had gone golden and dry with the slide toward autumn. Caleb drove. Clara sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap and thought through what she needed to ask the old man, and in what order, because questions had a sequence, and the sequence mattered when you were trying to pull a specific truth out of someone's decades-old memory. She had done this kind of work before, in circumstances she did not particularly want to think about this morning. She thought about them anyway. The man she had left in Missouri, the man whose reach had followed her to Cheyenne, and whom she was fairly certain had not yet followed her to Hatcher's Creek, but whose patience she had learned never to underestimate. His name was Douglas Everett Hale, and he was her mother's brother, and he had spent the last 6 years believing that he had a legal claim to the land and money her parents had left her, and that Clara's stubborn refusal to accept this was a temporary condition he had every intention of outlasting. She had not run from Hale because she was weak. She had run because she was practical, because fighting him in Missouri required money she didn't have and allies she couldn't assemble in a town where Hale had 20 years of influence built up. The fight was not winnable there on his ground, on his terms. But she had not stopped thinking about how to win it. She had in fact been thinking about it every day since she left. The irony, the particular somewhat painful irony, was that the situation here at Whitmore Ranch was uncomfortably familiar in its essential shape. A powerful man using legal ambiguity and financial pressure to take land from someone with less money and less institutional leverage. Clara had grown up watching this playbook work. She had spent 6 years being one of its targets. She knew its mechanics from the inside. That knowledge she was beginning to understand was possibly the most useful thing she had brought to Wyoming. She had not told Caleb any of this yet. She knew she would have to. The honesty they had built between them in these weeks was the kind that didn't accommodate indefinite omission. She had seen what happened when omissions met honesty at the wrong moment, and the result was always worse than disclosure would have been. But she needed to understand what she was dealing with here first. She needed to be sure that her history wouldn't become a weapon in the hands of someone who was already looking for weapons. One thing at a time. Harlan Meeks's place was a small farmstead that had contracted over the years to the size one very old, very organized man required. The house was small and extremely neat. An old dog lifted its head from the porch boards as they pulled up and then lowered it again, deciding they were not worth the effort of a proper greeting. Harlan himself appeared in the doorway before Caleb had finished setting the brake. He was small and white-haired and moved with the careful economy of someone who had long since negotiated a truce with his body's limitations, but his eyes, as Gus had said, were remarkable. Dark and quick and entirely present. "Caleb Whitmore," the old man said. "Last time I saw you, you were 14 years old and trying to convince your father that a horse you were not going to be able to afford was worth the price they were asking for it." "I remember," Caleb said, climbing down. "You agreed with me. My father still didn't buy the horse. Your father was wiser than both of us on that occasion." Harlan's eyes moved to Clara. "And this is my wife," Caleb said. "Clara." Harlan studied her for a moment. "Come inside," he said. "I'll put coffee on." Inside the small house was a library that had no business being there. Shelves covering 2 walls from floor to ceiling, books, standing in rows so tight they had to be extracted carefully. Clara noticed this with a particular warmth she didn't show. A man who had covered his walls with books was a man she had some established feelings about. Harlan saw her looking. 50 years of occupying a mind that doesn't know how to be idle, he said. Books were cheaper than the alternative. What was the alternative? Clara asked. Trouble, Harlan said pleasantly. Sit down, both of you. Over coffee that was strong enough to constitute a medical intervention, Caleb explained what they'd found in the deed documents and what they believed Harrison Cole was planning. Harlan listened with the focused stillness of a man who processes information at a speed that doesn't require visible reaction. When Caleb finished, Harlan was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas Aldrich," he said finally. "I worked under Tom Aldrich for 11 years. Fine surveyor, meticulous. Not a man who made careless errors." "But the numbers don't agree," Clara said carefully. "No," Harlan said. "They wouldn't." The quality of that statement stopped the room. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "Harlan." The old man set down his coffee cup. He looked at it for a moment, and then at the bookshelf, and then at Caleb, with the expression of a man making a decision he has been postponing for a long time. "The survey was conducted correctly," he said. "I was there. I carried the chain myself, and Tom read the markers, and every number was accurate and agreed. The eastern boundary of James Whitmore's expansion was exactly where it should be." He paused. "The discrepancy you found in the filing was not Tom Aldrich's error." Caleb went very still. "Someone changed the number in the filed document," Harlan said. "After it was filed." The silence in the small room was complete. "How do you know that?" Clara said, keeping her voice even. "Because Tom came to me about it," Harlan said. 6 months before he died. He'd gone into the courthouse to look up something else, a different filing, and he pulled ours just to check because he was meticulous that way. He saw the discrepancy. He knew his own numbers, and he knew what he'd written. He was... Harlan paused. He was frightened. Tom wasn't a man who frightened easily. "Did he report it?" Caleb said. "He tried." Harlan's voice was dry and heavy at once. "He went to the county clerk, man named Patterson. Patterson said the records showed what they showed and Tom must be misremembering." "Tom wasn't misremembering," But he was old and he was sick, and Patterson was county clerk with all the institutional weight that implies. Another pause. Tom died 4 months after that conversation. I always believed the worry of it hastened him. Caleb stood up. He moved away from the table. Clara had seen him do this when something hit too hard. This instinctive physical need to put space between himself and the center of a thing. "Who changed it?" he said. He was facing the bookshelf, not the room. "I don't know," Harlan said. Tom didn't know, but he believed, and I believed him, that it wasn't an accident. That number didn't transpose itself. He paused. "Patterson is dead now, too. His replacement is a young man who's been clerk for 2 years and may or may not know what he's sitting on top of," Clara said. "Harlan, would you put in writing what you just told us? A formal statement witnessed and signed describing what Tom Aldrich told you and what you personally know about the accuracy of the original survey." Harlan looked at her, long, measuring. "If I do that," he said, "I become relevant to whatever fight is coming." "Yes," Clara said honestly. "You do." He was quiet. The old dog had come inside at some point and settled near the stove, and the only sound was the creak of the house in the wind and the dog's slow breathing. "James Whitmore was a good man," Harlan said finally. He said it the same way Gus Pullman had said it, with the weight of genuine conviction. "He was fair to every man he dealt with, and he earned every acre of that land without a dishonest move. I wasn't able to do anything for him when Tom came to me with this." Tom was scared, and then Tom was gone and the window closed. He looked at Caleb's back. "I'm not willing to let the window close again," he said. Caleb turned around. His face was controlled, but Clara could see the effort of the control, the particular tightness around his eyes. "Thank you," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. "Don't thank me yet," Harlan said. "Thank me when it's done." They were halfway back to the ranch before Caleb spoke. "My father never knew," he said. Not a question. A statement that was also a kind of grief. "Probably not," Clara said. "Harlan would have told him. Tom Aldrich would have told him. If they'd known before Tom died. He spent 20 years building that land, and someone was already—" Caleb stopped. His hands were tighter on the reins than necessary. "He died believing the ranch was safe, believing the deed was clean." "The deed is clean," Clara said. "The survey is accurate. That's what Harlan just told us. The document in the courthouse is the problem, not the deed itself." "A piece of paper in a courthouse is what a court sees," Caleb said. "Not what was true." "Then we give the court something better than a piece of paper," Clara said. "We give them Harlan's testimony and Edmund Farley's legal knowledge and the original survey chain readings, and we build a case that makes Cole's challenge look like exactly what it is." She paused. "But we have to move fast. If Cole files before we've established our defense—" "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Clara." "Yes." "What you're doing, what you've been doing since you found those letters." He stopped, started again. "I need you to know that I understand this isn't what you agreed to. You came here for a particular arrangement, and I've managed to hand you a legal crisis, and a potential land battle, and—" "Caleb." She kept her voice quiet, but direct. "Stop." He looked at her. "I'm not here under the terms of that arrangement anymore," she said. "I'm here because I chose to be here. There's a difference." She held his eyes for a moment. "Don't explain to me what I haven't signed up for. I can see the ledger myself." He looked at her for a long beat, and the wagon rolled on through the September grass, and he didn't say anything else for another mile. Then he said quietly, "All right." She nodded, and they rode the rest of the way home without speaking, and it was the most comfortable silence Clara had experienced in longer than she could immediately account for. The town noticed. This was inevitable. Clara had understood from her first week that Hatcher's Creek was too small and too interested in its own affairs to miss much. And a new wife at Whitmore Ranch who appeared competent and energetic and willing to go to the mercantile and the feed store and have opinions was not the kind of detail that escaped collective attention. What she had not fully anticipated was the speed and creativity with which that attention manufactured interpretation. She heard the first version of it from old Mrs. Calloway at the dry goods store, who said while measuring out a length of calico that Clara had requested, "I suppose you must find it quiet out here after city life, dear." The emphasis on city life carried a weight that had nothing to do with geography. She heard the second version from the pastor's wife who stopped her outside the church the following Sunday and inquired with the warm persistence of someone who has appointed herself the moral register of an entire community about whether Clara had family she was in correspondence with, and whether Caleb understood the full circumstances of her background. She heard the third version, which was the sharpest, from a woman named Vera Aldgate, who caught her at the water pump beside the mercantile and said with the directness of someone who had decided social niceties were less satisfying than plain speaking, "People are saying you married him for the land, you know. That you've got people back east looking for you, and you needed somewhere to disappear to." Clara set down her bucket. She looked at Vera Aldgate steadily. "People are saying that," she said. "I'm not saying I believe it." Vera said, though her tone suggested some comfortable relationship with the rumor, "I'm just telling you what's being said." "I appreciate the warning," Clara said, in a voice that was entirely pleasant and entirely definite at once. "Tell me who started it." Vera blinked. She had not expected to have the conversational territory turned. It's just around is all. People talk. People do talk," Clara agreed. "I've noticed that Harrison Cole is new to this community and yet appears to be involved in a great many of its conversations. Has anyone mentioned that?" Vera stared at her. Clara picked up her bucket. "Good day, Mrs. Aldgate." She walked back to the wagon with the particular posture of a woman who is not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her hurry. But inside she was thinking very fast. The rumors were not accidental. She had seen this before, the strategic seeding of doubt about a person's character designed to isolate them, to undercut their credibility before a fight arrived, to make the community less likely to stand with them when the moment came. Cole was not only working the courthouse, he was working the town, which meant he was closer to his next move than she had estimated. That evening she told Caleb everything she had heard. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to rely on about him, the quality of his attention when she was speaking, the absence of the male tendency to respond before a woman had finished saying what she came to say. When she finished, he said, "He's trying to turn people against us before we can build alliances." "Yes," Clara said, "and he's using me to do it. I'm the new element, the unknown quantity. That makes me easier to cast as a liability." She paused. "There's something else. Mrs. Aldgate said people are saying I have people back east looking for me." A beat of silence. "Do you?" Caleb said. He said it simply. No accusation in it. Just the question straight. This was the moment. Clara had known it was coming, had been circling it for days, had been arranging and rearranging the words in her mind, the way you rearrange things in a room when you're trying to decide what can stay and what has to go. "Yes," she said. Caleb waited. "My mother's brother," she said, "Douglas Hale. He lives in Jefferson City. He has been claiming for 6 years that the property my parents left to me rightfully belongs to him under an amendment to my father's will that I believe was forged after my father's death." She kept her voice even. It took effort. "He has considerable influence in Jefferson City. I spent 2 years trying to fight him there, and I ran out of money and options. I left when it became clear he intended to make the legal pressure indefinitely expensive." She paused. "I don't believe he knows I'm in Wyoming. I've been careful. But if Harrison Cole has been making inquiries about my background..." "Cole might find him," Caleb said. "Or Hale might already be looking, and Cole might find him useful," Clara said. "Two different problems that could become one problem very quickly." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Clara kept her hands still in her lap and waited. This was the place where a man could go several directions. He could go toward anger, the sense of having been deceived, of having entered an arrangement on incomplete information. He could go toward withdrawal, the calculation that her history made his situation worse, and the instinct to put distance between them. He could go toward the kind of cold practicality that looked like reason but was really self-protection. She had prepared herself for all of these. She had not in any serious way prepared herself for what he actually said. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Every detail of what Hale did, and what you tried, and what the legal situation is as you understand it." He leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Because if he's coming, I want to know what we're dealing with." "We." Clara looked at him across the kitchen table in the lamplight. She thought about the first night when she had not unpacked her traveling case entirely. Old habit. The habit of a woman who had learned that staying was always provisional, that safety was always temporary, that the wisest thing she could do was keep herself ready to leave. She thought about how she still had not fully unpacked it. "Caleb," she said carefully, "you understand what I'm telling you. I may have brought something dangerous to your door." "You didn't bring anything to my door," he said. "A man with bad intentions and a longer reach followed you toward it." "That's not the same thing." His voice was steady and completely serious. "Now tell me." She told him. All of it. The will, the forged amendment, the 2 years in Jefferson City fighting Hale through every legal channel available to a woman with limited funds against a man with deep local roots, the decision to leave, the careful construction of distance between herself and everything Hale could use to find her, the boarding house in Cheyenne, the letter she had answered. She talked for a long time. He listened for all of it. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the wind working its way around the corners of the house. Caleb said, "Edmund Farley." Clara blinked. "What?" "The lawyer in Cheyenne I wrote to about the deed," he said. His practice before retirement included probate law, will contests, estate fraud. A pause. "I'm going to write to him again. Tell him there are 2 matters, not 1. Clara stared at him. "Also," Caleb continued, "I think it's time you unpacked your traveling case." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I've noticed," he said simply, "that it's still mostly packed." The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It had a different temperature, a different weight. "I didn't know how long I'd be staying," Clara said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "You're staying," Caleb said. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, without performance, without embellishment, with the plain certainty of a man who means exactly what he says. "This is your home. Whatever's coming, Cole, Hale, the bank, all of it, we're going to handle it, together." He paused. "But I need you to unpack the case, Clara, because I can't fight alongside someone who's still halfway out the door." Clara looked at him for a long time. Outside the Wyoming night pressed at the windows, vast and dark and indifferent to everything happening inside this small kitchen, where 2 people who had come together out of necessity were sitting across a table, becoming something neither of them had planned. She stood up. She walked down the hall to her room. She opened her traveling case and she unpacked it, every folded item, every small thing she had held in reserve, every piece of herself she had kept packed and portable and ready to be carried to the next place. She put it all away. She hung the case on the hook behind the door. And when she came back to the kitchen, Caleb was still at the table and he looked at her and didn't say anything, and she sat back down and poured them both more coffee, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Some things don't require words. Some things are simply decided in the doing of them, in the hanging of a case on a hook, in the act of putting down the weight you've been carrying so long, you'd stop noticing how heavy it was. Clara Whitmore was staying. And somewhere in the Wyoming night, Harrison Cole was making his next move, and Douglas Hale, who had been patient for 6 years, was about to discover that the woman he had underestimated had found something he had never managed to take from her, a place she was willing to fight for. Edmund Farley's reply arrived on a Tuesday 9 days after Caleb sent the second letter. Clara was at the kitchen table going over the cattle accounts when she heard the wagon coming up the road. Not Gus's wagon, which she could identify now by the particular rhythm of its left rear wheel, but the mail carrier out of Hatcher's Creek, who made the rural run twice weekly. She was at the door before the man had fully stopped, and she took the envelope from his hand with a thank you that was genuine and walked back inside without waiting for conversation. She set the letter on the table. She did not open it. She went to the barn door and called Caleb's name, and something in the way she said it, not loud, not alarmed, but carrying a particular quality of weight, brought him out from behind the hay, stacked against the far wall, faster than a shout would have. He read the return address on the envelope. He sat down at the table. He opened it. Edmund Farley wrote the way Clara imagined he must have argued cases in court, clean, direct, without the decorative language that lawyers sometimes used to justify their fees. He had received Caleb's 2 letters. He had spent several days considering the matters described. He believed, on the basis of what Caleb had outlined, that both situations, the deed discrepancy and the estate fraud involving Clara's inheritance, were serious and required immediate attention. He was prepared to travel from Cheyenne to Hatcher's Creek the following week if Caleb could confirm his availability. He would need access to all original documents pertaining to both matters. He added near the end of the letter, spent 40 years practicing law, and in that time had developed a particular dislike for men who used legal machinery as a weapon against people with less institutional power than themselves. He did not charge for cases that interested him. Caleb set the letter down. "He's coming Tuesday," he said. "Then we have 6 days to organize everything he'll need," Clara said. She was already moving to the shelf. Caleb watched her for a moment, the efficiency of her, the way she moved through a problem like someone who had learned that hesitation cost more than it saved, and he felt something shift in his chest that was becoming familiar and that he had not yet found the precise words for. "Clara," he said. She turned. "We're going to win this," he said. She looked at him for a beat. Her expression did something complicated, a brief softness that she didn't hide exactly, but didn't extend. "Ask me again when Farley's been through the documents," she said, but she didn't entirely suppress the corner of her mouth, and that was enough. Harrison Cole moved on Thursday. They found out from Gus, who rode in hard that morning with his horse breathing from the pace he'd set, which was something Clara had never seen from Gus Pullman, and which told her before he said a word that whatever he was carrying was not good. "He filed," Gus said, climbing down before the horse had fully stopped. "Yesterday afternoon, Cole filed a formal challenge to the eastern boundary of the expansion deed at the courthouse. He's claiming the survey marker is defective, and the acreage beyond the discrepancy reverts to public land." He paused. Patterson, the clerk, not the dead one, the new young one, he accepted the filing. Caleb said nothing for a moment. Clara said, "When does the challenge go before the land commissioner?" 3 weeks, Gus said. "That's the standard window. Cole's lawyer requested expedited review." He looked at Caleb. "The lawyer is a man named Strickland. He came in from Denver. I've heard the name before, and nothing I've heard is good. 3 weeks. Clara ran the numbers in her head. Farley arriving Tuesday. 5 days to prepare to organize the documents to construct a response. Harlan Meeks's statement, which she had collected in writing the previous week with 2 witnesses present. The original survey chain readings which Harlan had confirmed were in his possession, and which matched Caleb's deed exactly. "It's manageable," she said. Both men looked at her. 3 weeks is tight, but it's enough if Farley is as capable as his letter suggests, and we're organized when he arrives. She paused. "What we can't afford is a second front opening at the same time." Gus frowned. "Second front," Caleb said. "There's another matter, involving Clara's history." He said it flatly, without elaboration, in the tone that meant he was sharing enough for Gus to understand the stakes without inviting extended discussion of what wasn't Gus's business yet. Gus absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that Clara had not expected. "Is the second matter connected to Cole?" She looked at him sharply. Gus said, "Because a man came through town 2 days ago asking questions about who had recently arrived in the county. specifically asking about women who had come from the East in the last few months. He paused. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for Hatcher's Creek. He said he was looking for a relative. The word landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Clara's hands went still on the table. "What did he look like?" she said. Her voice was completely level. This was not the steadiness of calm. It was the steadiness of a person who has learned to hold themselves very still when something frightening surfaces, because stillness is the only thing that doesn't give information away. Gus described him. Clara nodded once, slowly. "That's Douglas Hale," she said. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that had physical weight. Caleb said, "He's here." "He's in Hatcher's Creek," she said, which means someone told him where to look. She paused, and the implication of that sat in the room between all three of them. Cole found him, or Hale found Cole. Either way, they've met and compared information, and now both of them are moving at the same time. Caleb stood up. He was very still in the particular way that meant his mind was working hard behind the stillness. "Gus," he said, "where is Hale now? Do you know?" "He was at the hotel when I left town," Gus said. "Asked for a room for at least a week." "Then we have today," Caleb said. He looked at Clara. "He doesn't know where the ranch is yet. Not exactly. He's asking questions, which means he hasn't been here." "He will come," Clara said. "Yes," Caleb said. "He will?" A pause. "I want to talk to Strickland." Both Clara and Gus looked at him. "Cole's lawyer," Caleb said. "I want to know what Cole is actually offering, because men like Cole don't pursue a complicated legal fight without leaving a back door open. There's a settlement number somewhere. There's a point at which they'd rather take money and walk away than spend 6 months in a land commissioner's office." His voice was measured. "I want to know that number." "Knowing the number doesn't mean paying it," Clara said. "No." Caleb agreed. "But it tells us how confident he actually is. A man with a strong case doesn't settle cheap. A man who's worried about what might come out in a proceeding makes the back door easy to find." Gus looked between them with an expression that had settled into something that resembled the satisfaction of a man watching two people work in good combination. "You want me to arrange the meeting," he said. "Quietly," Caleb said. "I know a quiet way," Gus said, and put his hat on, and left. Clara spent the rest of that morning going through the documents again, but her mind was not fully on the documents. Part of it was in Hatcher's Creek at the hotel, tracing the moves of a man she had spent 6 years not thinking about when she could help it, and thinking about constantly when she couldn't. Douglas Hale was not a stupid man. That had always been the hardest part of it, that he was intelligent and patient and capable of a long game in a way that most people were not. He had waited 2 years after her parents' death before he made his move with the will amendment, which told you something about the quality of his planning. He had spent 6 years tracking her or maintaining the conditions under which he would eventually find her, with a persistence that went beyond the money involved. It had always been about more than the money. It was about the fact that she had refused, that she had looked at what he had done, the forged amendment, the systematic dismantling of her legal standing, and she had refused to accept it, had fought it, had cost him time and effort and the irritation of an opponent who should by every measure of power have been easier to defeat. Men like Hale did not forget being inconvenienced by people they had expected to capitulate. She was thinking about all of this when Caleb came back from the barn and found her sitting at the table with all the documents spread out and her hands flat on the table and her eyes focused on the middle distance somewhere past the window. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He didn't say anything. After a moment, Clara said, "He's going to tell people that I'm a thief. That's what he does. He builds the legal pressure, and then he builds the social pressure alongside it, gets the community talking, gets people questioning my character, so that when the legal fight happens, anyone who might support us is already uncertain." She paused. "He did it in Jefferson City. By the time I left, there were people who believed I had forged my own father's will to steal from my uncle. Douglas made certain of that. Caleb said, "Let him say it." She looked at him. "Let him come here and say it to people who have watched you work for 6 weeks," Caleb said. "Let him say it to Gus Pullman, who sat at this table and figured out in one conversation that you're worth trusting. Let him say it to Harlan Meeks, who gave you his signed statement without hesitation." He paused. Jefferson City was his ground. This is ours. Clara looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his voice she had not heard before. Not loudness, not performance, but a quality of bedrock certainty that went deeper than either of those things. "You said ours," she said quietly. "That's what I said." He agreed. She looked at the table, at the documents spread across it. His father's deed, the original survey readings. Harlan's statement, the bank correspondence, the beginnings of the case they were building. She thought about the night she had unpacked her traveling case and put it on the hook behind the door. She thought about how the hook was still there and the case was still on it. "Caleb," she said, "when this is done, when it's finished one way or another, I need you to know that I came here." "Clara," he said. She stopped. "I know why you came here," he said. "You came here because you needed somewhere to go, and the letter I wrote was honest. I know that." He met her eyes. "I also know that that's not why you're still here." He paused. "Those are two different things, and the second one is the only one that matters to me now." The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside, one of the horses moved in the corral. The wind worked at the window on the south wall, still not fixed, still on the list. Clara said, "I'm still here because this is where I want to be." "I know," Caleb said. "I want you to know that I said it, not I want you to hear me say it." He held her gaze. "I hear you." And that was the moment, not dramatic, not announced. Nothing like the way stories sometimes made these moments into grand gesture and declaration. Just two people at a kitchen table saying true things to each other in plain language, and the air between them settling into something new and permanent. IED. The meeting with Strickland happened Friday afternoon at the hotel in Hatcher's Creek, arranged by Gus through a chain of connections that Clara preferred not to examine too carefully. Strickland turned out to be a compact, well-groomed man in his mid-40s, who had the careful eyes of someone accustomed to measuring what could be used against him before he spoke. Caleb walked in. Clara walked in beside him. Strickland had clearly not expected the wife. His eyes moved to her and recalibrated quickly. Professional practiced, but she caught the adjustment. "Mr. Whitmore," Strickland said, "I understood this was to be a private conversation." "My wife is involved in the management of our ranch," Caleb said, sitting down across from the lawyer. "I don't make decisions about its future without her." A beat. Strickland sat back. "Very well," he said. What followed was 30 minutes of the specific language lawyers use when they want to communicate a threat while maintaining the appearance of reasonableness. Strickland laid out the challenge to the deed with the measured confidence of someone who believed in his case. He spoke about the discrepancy in the survey marker. He spoke about the complexity of the legal proceedings. He spoke about the time and expense involved in contesting the challenge before the land commissioner. And then, with the air of a man doing a favor, he mentioned that his client was a reasonable man who preferred resolution to conflict, that there might be in the interest of everyone involved a straightforward path that avoided the difficulty ahead. "How much?" Caleb said. Strickland named a number. It was low. Clara had expected something low, because that was what Caleb had predicted. A confident man with a strong case didn't settle cheap, and she felt the specific kind of cold satisfaction that comes from a theory proving out. "That's considerably below market value," Clara said. She kept her voice conversational. "Even accounting for the disputed acreage." Strickland looked at her. "The disputed acreage represents significant uncertainty, Mrs. Whitmore. My client is offering to remove that uncertainty." "Your client is offering to profit from a discrepancy in a document that was altered after filing," Clara said, still conversational, still pleasant. Strickland's expression went very still. "We have the testimony of the deputy surveyor who was present at the original survey," Clara continued. We have his signed statement attesting that the numbers as filed do not match the numbers as recorded in the field. We have the original chain readings in his possession. And we have an attorney, Edmund Farley. Perhaps you know the name, arriving from Cheyenne next Tuesday to organize our response." She paused. "Your client's case depends on a document that we can demonstrate was altered. That is a different legal situation than a genuine survey dispute." The silence in the room had a quality that was almost audible. Strickland said nothing for a moment. Clara watched him processing, watched the confidence not leave his face entirely, because he was too practiced for that, but shift underneath it settled differently, recalculate. "You may find," Strickland said carefully, "that testimony from an elderly witness carries less weight than you anticipate. Harlan Meeks is 81 years old, in full possession of his faculties, and worked under Thomas Aldrich for 11 years, Clara said. "He will make an excellent witness." She paused. "I'd also like you to carry a message back to your client." Strickland waited. "We know about the railroad spur," Clara said. The color in Strickland's face did something interesting. "We know why this particular ridge is worth pursuing," she continued. "And we know that information, the route, the timing, the men involved in the decision, is the kind of information that the railroad company might find concerning if they learned that someone was using advanced knowledge of their route to fraudulently acquire land ahead of the announcement." She paused. "That's a conversation that might interest a federal land commissioner considerably more than a survey discrepancy." Strickland stood up. "This meeting is concluded," he said. "I agree," Clara said pleasantly. He left. Caleb waited until the door was fully closed and then said without looking at her, "Federal Land Commissioner." "It's a real risk for him," Clara said. "Using inside railroad information to acquire land is exactly the kind of thing federal oversight gets involved in. Whether or not we actually have evidence of it, which we don't, yet the threat is real enough to cost him sleep." "You were bluffing," Caleb said. "I was presenting a possibility," Clara said. "There's a distinction." Caleb looked at her for a moment. And then, for the first time since she had met him at the depot in the late afternoon sunlight, Caleb Whitmore smiled. Not the partial thing, the almost smile, the architectural cousin of it. A real smile, full and genuine, and slightly disbelieving. "Lord," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said, echoing Harlan. "Thank me when it's done." They were walking out through the hotel lobby when they saw Douglas Hale. He was standing near the front desk, speaking to the clerk, and he turned at the sound of the door and saw Clara, and everything in that moment happened very fast. Clara stopped walking. Hale stopped speaking mid-sentence. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent a long time looking for something and is now surprised to have found it in a place he wasn't fully expecting. It was not a warm expression. It had never been a warm expression. Caleb felt Clara stop beside him. He felt the change in her, not fear exactly, but the particular quality of stillness he had come to recognize as her response to something that required all of her resources. He took one step forward, just one step, to stand at her shoulder. Hale's eyes moved to him. "Douglas," Clara said. Her voice was completely steady. "You've come a long way." "Clara," Hale said, "you've been difficult to find." "That was intentional," she said. Hale's eyes moved back to Caleb, assessing. The particular assessment of a man accustomed to reading opponents for weakness. Caleb met his eyes and did not look away. "Your husband, I presume," Hale said. "Caleb Whitmore," Caleb said. His voice was level and not friendly. "And you'd be the man who's been chasing my wife across 3 states to take what belongs to her." Hale smiled. The smile was practiced and carried no warmth whatsoever. "I see Clara has been telling stories," he said. "I'm her family. I have a legitimate legal claim to certain property that was misdirected by—" "We have a lawyer arriving Tuesday," Caleb said. "Edmund Farley out of Cheyenne. He specializes in probate fraud. If you have a legitimate claim, you can put it to him in writing and he'll respond appropriately." He paused. If you approach my wife outside of that legal process, I'll take the matter to the county sheriff. Are we understood?" Hale's smile stayed in place. "You're in over your head, Mr. Whitmore." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Wouldn't be the first time." He put his hand at the small of Clara's back, gentle present, not pulling, simply there, and they walked out through the hotel door and onto the plank sidewalk and into the Wyoming afternoon. Clara walked 2 paces before she stopped. She put one hand flat against the building's wall and breathed. Just breathed. For a moment that was longer than she wanted and shorter than she needed. "Clara," Caleb said quietly. "I'm all right," she said. "Give me one moment." He gave her the moment. He stood beside her on the sidewalk in the autumn light and gave her the moment without commentary or rush or any attempt to fill the space with reassurance she didn't need. After that moment, she straightened. She took her hand off the wall. She looked at him. "He's not going to stop," she said. "Hale doesn't stop. You need to know that." "I know," Caleb said. "He has money, and he has patience, and he has 6 years of motivation too, Clara." He said her name the way he'd begun to say it in the last weeks, with a quiet certainty that was not dismissal. "I know he doesn't stop. I'm not asking him to stop." She looked at him. "I'm asking him to fail," Caleb said simply. Something unlocked in Clara's chest that she hadn't fully known was locked. It was brief, and she didn't show it, because 6 years of managing herself carefully didn't dissolve in one afternoon on a sidewalk. But it was there. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They walked to the wagon. The next 3 days were the most compressed of Clara's life since Jefferson City. Gus came back Saturday morning with news that Cole and Hale had been seen dining together at the hotel the previous evening, which confirmed what they had suspected. The 2 men had found each other's interests complementary and were now operating as something like a single strategy. Cole wanted the land. Hale wanted Clara's inheritance, and specifically wanted to destroy her credibility in any community she had built. They were sharing information and likely sharing plans. 2 men with 2 problems trying to make them into one solution, Clara said. She was at the table again. The table had become over the past weeks something like a war room, documents, correspondence accounts, and now the fresh intelligence from Gus spread across its surface. Cole attacks the land. Hale attacks my character. Between them, they believe they can destabilize everything we've built. "Can they?" Gus asked. Clara looked at Caleb. Caleb said, "Not if we move first." "What does moving first look like?" Gus said. It was Clara who answered. "The town meeting," she said. "When is the next one?" Gus thought about it. "First Monday of the month. That's 10 days. Is there a mechanism to call an emergency meeting sooner?" Gus looked at her steadily. "If enough landowners request it." "How many is enough?" 5, Gus said. 5 property owners can call for an emergency community meeting. Clara said, "You, us, the Driscolls. Who's the 5th? "Martin Heber," Gus said immediately. "He's got the old Crane property on the north side. Cole made overtures to him in the spring, too. He said no, but he's been quiet about it." A pause. "He wouldn't be quiet for this." "Can you reach him today?" Caleb said. "I can reach him this afternoon," Gus said. "Then we call the meeting for Wednesday," Clara said, "before Cole files anything further and before Hale has time to spread more of what he's been spreading." She paused. "We don't go to this town asking for pity or sympathy. We go with documents. With Harlan's testimony. With the specific factual case for what Cole is doing and why it matters not only to us, but to every landowner on this ridge." "And Hale," Gus said. "Hale I handle separately," Clara said. "At the meeting I'm a rancher defending her land. That's the only thing that needs to be true on Wednesday." Gus nodded slowly. Caleb was watching her with that expression she knew now, the one that had traveled over weeks of mornings and evenings and crises worked through at this table from careful assessment to something she had stopped pretending was only respect. "There's a problem," Gus said. They both looked at him. "Edna Pruitt," he said. "And the 3 or 4 women who take their opinions from her. They've been talking. Specifically talking about Clara, about her background, about why she came here, about whether she and Caleb's marriage is what it appears to be." He paused, and the discomfort in his face was genuine. "At a town meeting, Edna Pruitt has a voice, and she's been given a lot of material to work with." The kitchen was quiet. Clara said, "When did she get this material?" Gus said, "It started about a week ago, the same week Hale arrived." "Hale spoke to her," Clara said. Not a question. "I don't have proof of that," Gus said. "But the timing—" "The timing is its own argument," Clara said. "All right." She straightened her back. "Then I'll need to speak to Edna Pruitt before Wednesday." Caleb said, "Clara, not in the way you're thinking," she said. "I'm not going to ask her for anything. I'm not going to defend myself or explain myself or try to make her like me." She paused. "I'm going to show her the documents. I'm going to explain exactly what Harrison Cole is attempting, and I'm going to make certain she understands that if he succeeds with Whitmore Ranch, the Pruitt family's property on the east end of town is the next logical target." She paused. "Edna Pruitt may not like me, but she loves that property. And she is not a stupid woman." Gus looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "She is not that." "Then let me talk to her." Caleb said nothing. He was watching her with an expression that was entirely clear to her now that she had a full and accurate name for, though she had not said that name aloud to him yet, and he had not said it to her. But it was there in the kitchen with them as surely as Gus was there, as surely as the documents on the table were there. "All right," Caleb said. "All right," Gus echoed. Clara put her hands on the documents. The deed, the survey readings, Harlan's statement, the bank correspondence, the letter from Edmund Farley. 6 weeks of work laid out on a table in the house that had started as a stranger's offer and had become piece by piece, choice by choice, the place she was willing to fight for. "Wednesday," she said. And they began to plan. Clara went to see Edna Pruitt on Monday morning. She went alone. Caleb had offered to come, and she had told him no, with enough quiet certainty that he hadn't pushed back. This was not a conversation that benefited from a husband standing at a woman's shoulder. What it required was exactly what Clara intended, to bring 2 women in a room, one of them holding documents, and nothing between them but the truth. Edna Pruitt's house was at the north end of Hatcher's Creek's main street, and it was the most aggressively maintained house Clara had seen since Missouri. The fence was white and level. The porch was swept. The curtains in the window were pulled to precisely the same height on both sides, which was the kind of symmetry that required daily attention. Clara knocked. The door opened almost immediately, which meant Edna had seen her coming, which meant Edna had been watching the street, which meant she had been expecting something, even if she hadn't known exactly what. "Mrs. Whitmore," Edna said. The name landed with the faint surprise it always carried when someone in town used it. Clara had not yet fully accounted for how strange it still felt to be called that by people who had known Caleb Whitmore before she existed in his life. "Mrs. Pruitt," Clara said, "I wonder if I might have 20 minutes of your time." Edna studied her for a moment with the thoroughness she apparently applied to everything. Then she stepped back from the door. They sat in the front parlor, which was as precisely ordered as the porch suggested it would be. Edna did not offer coffee. This was information. Clara set her folder of documents on her lap and did not open it yet. "I'm going to speak plainly," Clara said, "because I believe you prefer that, and because I don't have time this week for anything else." Edna's chin lifted slightly. "Go on. You've been hearing things about me," Clara said. "About my background. About why I came to Wyoming and what I left behind. Some of what you've heard has come from a man named Douglas Hale, who arrived in Hatcher's Creek last week and who is my mother's brother." She paused. "Douglas Hale has been attempting for 6 years to take the property my parents left me through a forged amendment to my father's will. I left Missouri when fighting him there became financially impossible. I came here and I married Caleb Whitmore because his letter was honest and this territory was far enough from Jefferson City that I believed I could build something without Hale finding me. She paused again. He found me, and the moment he arrived, he made contact with Harrison Cole. Edna said nothing, but her hands folded in her lap had gone still in a way that meant she was listening with her full attention. Harrison Cole, Clara continued, has filed a legal challenge to the eastern boundary of Whitmore Ranch based on a discrepancy in a survey document that we have reason to believe was altered after its original filing. The purpose of the challenge is to depress the value of the land, create legal uncertainty, and ultimately acquire the acreage at a price far below its value, because that acreage sits along the route of a railroad spur that will make it worth 3 to 4 times what it is today. She opened the folder. I have the original survey readings certified by the deputy surveyor who conducted the work. I have a sworn statement from that surveyor attesting that the document on file at the courthouse does not match the numbers he recorded in the field. She placed the documents on the table between them. And I have something else. She pulled out the last page. This is a list of properties along the same ridge. Properties whose deeds were filed in the same period and processed through the same clerk's office. She set it down. The Pruitt family property on the east side of Hatcher's Creek is on this list. Edna looked at the list. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Cole's strategy with our land, Clara said quietly, is a template. If it works, there is no reason for him not to apply it to every property on that ridge with any irregularity he can find or manufacture in the records. She paused. I'm not here to ask you to like me, Mrs. Pruitt. I'm not asking you to believe every word I've said about Douglas Hale. I'm asking you to look at these documents and consider whether the threat to Whitmore Ranch is also a threat to properties that matter to you. The parlor was very quiet. Edna picked up the list. She read it carefully, the way a woman reads something when she is genuinely deciding what to think, rather than looking for confirmation of what she already believes. Then she set it down and picked up Harlan Meeks's statement and read that. She set that down too. She looked at Clara. The survey deputy? She said. Harlan Meeks. Yes, my husband knew Harlan Meeks. Called him the most careful man who ever carried a survey chain in Wyoming territory. She paused. My husband has been gone 11 years, but he knew men worth knowing. Harlan's statement is notarized, Clara said, and witnessed by 2 individuals unconnected to our situation. Edna was quiet again. Then she said, The meeting is Wednesday. Yes, I'll be there. A pause, brief but weighted. And I'll bring Ruth Calloway and May Heber. They listen to me. Another pause. You should know that what Hale told people about you, the story about the will, he told it in a way that sounded convincing. It always does, Clara said. He's had 6 years to refine it. Something in Edna's expression shifted. Not warm, exactly. Edna Pruitt was perhaps not built for warmth toward a woman she had already filed under suspicion. But the shift was real. It was the expression of a woman revising a judgment and being honest enough not to hide the revision. He came to me directly, Edna said. 2 days after he arrived, he said he was concerned for his niece, that she had a history of... She stopped. He was very convincing. I know, Clara said. He's not a good man, Edna said. It was not a question. No, Clara said. He's not. Edna nodded once with the finality of someone closing a chapter. She picked up the documents and handed them back to Clara. Wednesday, she said again. Clara stood. She gathered her folder. At the door she paused. Mrs. Pruitt? She said. Thank you. Edna made a small sound that was not quite dismissal and not quite acceptance. Don't thank me, she said. I'm protecting my fence line. Clara smiled on the walk back to the wagon. She let herself have that. Edmund Farley arrived Tuesday afternoon and he was nothing like what Clara had pictured from the letter. She had pictured someone formal, silver-haired, careful in the way of men who have spent decades inside courtrooms learning that precision is a form of armor. What stepped off the Cheyenne stage was a short, broad man in his late 60s who wore a coat that had survived better decades and carried a leather case so battered it appeared to have been in active service since the war. He had a face that had been organized by 60 years of strong weather and stronger opinions, and his handshake when he took Clara's hand on the depot platform was the handshake of someone who had stopped making distinctions between who deserved a firm grip and who didn't. "You're the wife," he said. "Clara Whitmore," she said. He looked at her with the quick total assessment of a man who had spent a career reading people in high-pressure rooms. "Caleb's letter said you found the discrepancy." "I did. And the Hale matter. That's yours." "It is." He nodded once. "Good," he said, as though something had been confirmed rather than introduced. "Let's get to work." They spent Tuesday evening and most of Wednesday morning at the kitchen table, with Farley going through every document with a thoroughness that was almost physical. He handled papers the way a doctor handled evidence, turning them, holding them to the light, setting them in sequences that Clara didn't always immediately understand, but that revealed their logic as he built his analysis aloud. He was, as advertised, not a man who wasted words. "The survey discrepancy is exploitable," he said sometime around midnight Tuesday. "Strickland knows it. What he doesn't know is that you have Meeks." He tapped Harlan's statement. "This changes the legal character of the challenge from a legitimate boundary dispute to something considerably more awkward for Cole." He paused. "Combined with the railroad information, however you came by it." He looked at Clara with a neutrality that suggested he had made a decision not to ask directly. "The federal angle is real. I know the regional land commissioner. He's an honest man. If there's credible evidence of advance railroad information being used for land acquisition, that's a matter he would take seriously." "We don't have evidence of that yet," Clara said. "Only the knowledge that Cole knows the route." "How do you know he knows it?" "Gus Pullman," Caleb said. "Who heard it from a chain of trustworthy people?" Farley looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Hearsay," he said, "but useful hearsay. Let me think about how to use it." He moved to the Hale documents. Now, the Missouri situation. He read through Clara's account, which she had organized in writing over the previous days. Dates, documents the sequence of legal maneuvers. Hale had used the names of the attorneys involved and the judges who had ruled. He read it with the same total attention he had given everything else, and when he finished he said, "The forged amendment." "Yes." "Do you have a copy of the original will?" "I have a certified copy, yes." He looked at her. "How did you get a certified copy if Hale controlled the probate process?" "I obtained it before the amendment was introduced," Clara said. "I had it certified in a separate county before Hale filed anything. I kept it." She paused. "I've been carrying it since I left Missouri." Farley was quiet for a moment. "You've been carrying the evidence this whole time," he said. "I've been carrying it," she said. "I didn't have the legal support to use it effectively in Missouri. That doesn't mean I intended to lose." Farley set his pen down. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was something in its family. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "you are going to make this considerably easier than I expected." Caleb across the table said nothing, but Clara felt him look at her, and she knew without looking back what the look contained, and she kept her eyes on Farley's, because this was not the moment for anything except work. "What can you do with it?" she said. "With the certified original will and a forged amendment." Farley's voice took on the quality she would come to recognize as his version of satisfaction. "In a federal context, where the use of the forged document crosses state lines, because Hale followed Clara here to continue the fraud quite a bit." He picked up his pen. "Let me draft something tonight." The community meeting at the Hatchers Creek Town Hall on Wednesday evening was the largest gathering the building had hosted since the county water rights dispute of 1879, according to Gus Pullman, who had been present at that meeting and appeared to find the comparison meaningful. Every chair was filled. People stood along the back wall. The Driscolls had come, which surprised Caleb. They were, as he had described, a family that kept to themselves, but Martin Driscoll had apparently decided that this particular evening warranted an exception. Martin Heber was there with his wife. Harlan Meeks was there, which had required Gus driving out to collect him. And the old man sat in the front row with his cane across his knees and his remarkable dark eyes moving around the room with the calm attention of someone who has seen a great many meetings and is reserving judgment on whether this one will be worth his time. Edna Pruitt was there exactly as she had said she would be, with Ruth Calloway and May Heber beside her in a row that communicated in the specific visual language of women who have learned to use seating arrangements as statements that they had arrived with a position already established. Harrison Cole was there. He sat on the right side of the room with Strickland beside him, and his presence was entirely deliberate, the presence of a man who had decided to watch his opponent perform in public, and who believed the performance would not go well. Douglas Hale was not there. This surprised Clara, and then it didn't. Hale had never been a man who put himself in rooms where outcomes were uncertain. He preferred to operate through influence already applied, through conversations already had, through doubts already seated, and then to wait and assess from a distance. His absence meant he had done what he'd come to do and was waiting to see what it produced. The town's elected council chair, a weathered rancher named Albert Moss, called the meeting to order with a manner that suggested he had not been told exactly what the evening would involve and was reserving the right to be unhappy about it later. Caleb spoke first. He was not a man who sought public speaking, and Clara knew this. She had watched him in town, seen the way he was more comfortable with action than with words in front of audiences. But he stood at the front of that room, and he spoke with the plainness and directness that was his fundamental character, and it was more effective than eloquence would have been. He explained what Cole had filed. He explained the survey discrepancy. He explained what Gus had learned about the railroad spur and what that meant for the value of the land Cole was pursuing. He did not perform outrage. He laid out facts the way he laid out tools before a job, with the specific placement of someone who knew what each one was for. When he finished, the room had the particular quiet of people who have been given information that is changing the shape of something they thought they understood. Then Clara stood up. She had thought about how to do this for 2 days. Not what to say, she knew what to say. How to be in that room as a woman who was still a stranger to most of the people in it, and who knew that Douglas Hale had spent a week working against her in the spaces between these chairs. She did not begin with the land. She said, "Most of you don't know me. You know I arrived here 8 weeks ago and married Caleb Whitmore and have been at his ranch since. Some of you have heard things about my background that were designed to make you uncertain about my character." She paused. "I'm not going to ask you to take my word against those things. I'm going to show you documents." She showed them. Harlan's statement first, which she read aloud in full, clearly, at a pace that let it be absorbed. Then the original survey readings. Then the deed. Then the specific numbers that didn't agree between the filed document and the field record, which she put on a board at the front of the room where everyone could see them. She watched the room as she spoke. She watched understanding replace confusion in face after face, the specific expression of a person who has been given a shape for something that was previously only a feeling of unease. Martin Driscoll said from the middle of the room, "If the document was altered, who altered it?" "We don't know," Clara said. "The clerk at the time was a man named Patterson. He's no longer living. The alteration happened at some point between the original filing and the present day, and determining exactly when will be part of the legal proceeding." She paused. "What we know is that the alteration benefits Harrison Cole's challenge. And we know that Cole has advanced knowledge of the railroad route that makes this particular land considerably more valuable than its current market price." Cole's voice came from the right side of the room. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Whitmore." His voice was controlled and smooth. "I'd be careful about making accusations you can't support in a legal proceeding." Clara looked at him. "I'm not making an accusation, Mr. Cole. I'm describing a pattern. The accusation will be made by Edmund Farley before the land commissioner." She paused. "You may know Edmund Farley's name. Something moved across Cole's face that he didn't fully suppress. She saw Strickland touch his client's sleeve, barely a feathering gesture, and Cole said nothing further. Gus Pullman stood up from his seat. He was not a man who spoke at meetings. This too Clara knew from Caleb's descriptions and from her own weeks of watching. His standing up had the quality of a significant gesture in a room that recognized the gesture's weight. "I've known Cole's type my whole life," Gus said. "Men who come into a county, find the weakest joint in somebody's fence and push." He paused. "The Whitmore land has always been clean. James Whitmore built it clean. I worked beside that man for 30 years, and I know his character the way I know the north pasture, every inch of it." He paused again. "His son built it the same way, and his son's wife has spent 2 months doing what the rest of us should have been paying closer attention to, which is watching who's watching our land records." He sat back down. The room was very quiet. Then Albert Moss said to no one in particular, "So what do we do?" It was Harlan Meeks who answered. The old man did not stand. He sat in his chair with his cane across his knees, and his voice came out with the measured authority of 81 years of being right about things. "You sign the petition Mr. Farley has prepared," Harlan said. "Every property owner in this room who doesn't want to spend the next 5 years watching someone work through the land records looking for things to challenge signs that petition. You take it to the county commissioners. You make clear that this community does not accept what's being done to the Whitmore deed as an isolated incident, but as a method that affects all of you." He paused. "And you let Edmund Farley take the legal fight where it needs to go." Farley, who had been sitting quietly at the side of the room, did not stand. He simply raised one hand briefly, acknowledging his name. Nothing more. Albert Moss looked at the room. The room looked at the petition that Farley's assistant was already moving through the rows, and the sound that followed was the sound of people deciding. Cole and Strickland left before the signing was complete. Clara watched them go. She did not feel triumph, not yet. She had been in enough fights to know that a meeting going well was not the same as a fight being won, and Cole was not a man who would change direction because a community meeting had gone against him. He would recalculate. He would find another angle. The petition would complicate his legal strategy, but it would not end it. What it had done was change the terrain. He had arrived in Hatcher's Creek, believing he was operating on ground where no one would stand together. That assumption was now expired. She felt Caleb beside her as the room began to move and talk and fill with the specific energy of people who have made a collective decision and are still surprised by it. "You were right about Edna," he said quietly. Clara glanced at Edna Pruitt, who was speaking to Ruth Calloway with the air of a woman whose opinion had been publicly vindicated and who was managing in her particular way to be both gracious and satisfied about it. "She loves that fence line," Clara said. Caleb made a sound that was the full version of the smile, the one she had first seen in the hotel lobby after Strickland left. Low and quiet and entirely genuine. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "When this is done, ask me again when it's done," she said. It had become their exchange, their particular shorthand, and she felt it settle between them now with a warmth that was nothing like the provisional comfort of the early weeks. Harlan Meeks appeared at her elbow. She had not heard him approach, but old men who had spent decades in the field had a quality of quiet movement that was easy to underestimate. "You did well tonight," he said. "The documents did well," Clara said. "The documents needed someone to believe in them enough to bring them here," Harlan said. "That's not a small thing." He paused. "Tom Aldrich would have been glad of this night." Clara looked at the old man. "I'm sorry we couldn't get it done while he was still alive to see it." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "He saw most of it," he said. "He knew the survey was right. He died knowing that. Sometimes knowing is enough." He looked at her with those remarkable dark eyes. "Don't let Hale take that from you. Knowing what's true. Don't let him make you doubt the ground you're standing on." "He's tried before," Clara said. "I know," Harlan said. "And here you are." He patted her hand once and moved away through the room with his cane, and Clara stood for a moment in the noise and movement of a community meeting that had gone the way she needed it to go, and she held what the old man had said inside her where it could do its work. Here you are. Yes. Here she was. They were 3 miles from town on the wagon road home when Caleb said, "There's a letter in my coat pocket. It came this morning and I didn't want to open it before the meeting." Clara looked at him. "Who is it from?" He reached into his pocket and handed it to her without looking away from the road. The return address was Jefferson City, Missouri. Not Hale's address. A different address. A law office she didn't recognize. Her hands didn't shake when she opened it. She had trained them out of that years ago. She read it. Once. Then again. Then she sat with it in her lap and looked at the dark road ahead of them and the stars pressing down over Wyoming in the way they only press down over open country where there was nothing between a person and the sky. "What is it?" Caleb said. "The probate court in Jefferson City," Clara said. "They have opened an investigation." She paused. "Into the amendment to my father's will." She paused again. "Apparently someone filed a complaint 2 months ago. An anonymous complaint with supporting documentation suggesting the amendment was introduced fraudulently." Caleb turned to look at her. "Someone in Jefferson City filed this before Hale ever arrived in Wyoming," Clara said slowly. "Someone who knew about the forged amendment and had enough documentation to trigger a formal court review." She turned the letter over as though something might be on the back. "The letter is notification that as the primary interested party, I'm entitled to be represented in the proceeding." "Who filed the complaint?" Caleb said. "Anonymous," she said. The wagon rolled on. Clara thought about her 6 years in Missouri. The people she had worked alongside. The attorneys who had tried to help her and run out of resources. The people in Jefferson City who had watched what Douglas Hale was doing and kept their silence because silence was the safe choice. She thought about which of them might have decided at some point in the last 2 months that silence was no longer something they could afford. She thought about the timing 2 months ago, which was before her letter to the matchmaking service, before Caleb's letter, before any of this. Someone in Jefferson City had moved before Hale came to Wyoming, which meant someone knew Hale was planning to move and had acted first. She did not know who that person was. She knew with a certainty that was deeper than logic and more reliable than evidence that it was someone who had watched Douglas Hale long enough to be tired of watching him. "Clara," Caleb said. She looked at him. "You're not alone in this," he said. "You haven't been alone in it for a while. I'm not sure you've fully let yourself believe that yet." She looked at him for a long moment in the dark of the wagon road, with Wyoming pressing down around them on every side. "I'm working on it," she said. He nodded. His eyes went back to the road. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket, and she sat beside him in the dark with the letter and the evening and the feeling of ground that was for the first time in 6 years not shifting underneath her, and she let herself carefully and incrementally begin to believe it. Edmund Farley filed the formal response to Cole's challenge on Thursday morning, 2 days after the community meeting, and the document he produced was by any measure a considerable piece of work. Clara read it at the kitchen table, while Farley sat across from her with his battered leather case open and his coffee growing cold, and she read it the way she read everything that mattered, carefully, completely, without skipping toward the conclusion, before she had followed every step of the argument that built it. When she finished, she set it down and looked at him. "You used the federal angle," she said. "I used it carefully," Farley said. "Not as an accusation, as a context. I've framed the challenge to the deed inside a broader pattern of land acquisition that raises questions for federal oversight. The land commissioner will see the pattern. He's not a stupid man, and he's been watching territory land grabs long enough to recognize the shape of one." He paused. "The petition from the community meeting helps considerably. 43 signatures from property owners in the county is not something a commissioner can treat as a private dispute. And Harlan's testimony. Harlan's testimony is the spine of the response," Farley said. "Everything else builds from it. If the court accepts his account of the original survey, and I have no reason to believe they won't given his credentials and the corroborating chain readings, then Cole's entire challenge rests on a document that we can demonstrate does not reflect what was actually filed." He paused. A document that was altered, Mrs. Whitmore. Not disputed. Altered. That is a considerably more serious legal situation than a genuine boundary question, and Strickland knows it. As if to confirm this, Strickland's response arrived by courier that same afternoon. It was a withdrawal. Not a settlement offer. Not a counterproposal. A formal withdrawal of the challenge filed with the county clerk and addressed to Farley's office in language that was professionally neutral and entirely bloodless, and said nothing whatsoever about why. Gus Pullman, when told, said simply, "Huh," in a tone that conveyed considerable satisfaction while technically expressing nothing. Caleb held the withdrawal notice and read it twice, and then set it on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man who doesn't trust himself to react before he's certain of what he's feeling. "It's done," Clara said. "The coal part," Caleb said. "The coal part," she agreed. They looked at each other across the table, and both understood without saying it that the other part, the Hale part, the Missouri part, the 6 years of following and forging, and the certified copy of the will that Clara had been carrying like a coal pressed to her chest since she left Jefferson City, that part was not done. That part was in some ways only beginning. Douglas Hale came to the ranch the following morning. Clara was at the corral when she heard the horse. She had learned in the weeks she'd been here to read the sounds of the property, which sounds belonged to the place, and which ones arrived with intention from outside it. This one arrived with intention. She did not go inside. She waited where she was. Hale dismounted at the fence line with the practiced ease of a man who had ridden his whole life and knew that physical competence was a form of authority. He was not a large man, but he carried himself as though he were, which had always been one of the things about him that Clara found most dangerous, the way he occupied space that wasn't his to occupy. Caleb came out of the barn. He had heard it too. He stood at Clara's left shoulder, not in front, not between them, at her shoulder where a partner stood. Hale stopped at the gate. "I heard Cole withdrew," he said. He was looking at Clara, not Caleb. He had always looked at Clara when he wanted to make a point, because he had learned years ago that she was the one who needed to be faced down. "Congratulations." "What do you want, Douglas?" Clara said. "I want to talk," he said. "Privately." "No," Clara said. He smiled the way he had smiled in the hotel lobby, practiced pressureless, the smile of a man who has decided to wait you out. "Clara, we're family." "We are not," she said. "We share a blood connection through my mother. That's not the same thing." Hale's eyes moved to Caleb. "Mr. Whitmore, your wife has a tendency to make simple situations complicated. I want you to understand that the matter between us is between you and Edmund Farley," Caleb said, "who I believe you'll be hearing from before the end of the week." Something shifted in Hale's face. Not much, just enough. "Farley," he said. "He's taken the Missouri matter," Caleb said, "along with the probate court notification that arrived from Jefferson City, which I believe you've also received by now if the court served you as the opposing party." He paused. "Have they, Douglas?" The use of the first name was deliberate, and Clara felt it land the removal of formality from a man who used formality as a weapon. Hale blinked once. A small thing. Significant. "I came here to offer a resolution," Hale said. His voice had shifted, still controlled, but reorganizing itself around a changed situation. "Clara keeps the Missouri property, in exchange for acknowledgement that the amendment—" "No," Clara said. Hale looked at her. "No acknowledgement," she said. "No negotiated resolution. No agreement that allows you to walk away from what you did without a full legal accounting." She paused. "You forged my father's name, Douglas. You did it within 3 months of his death, and you've spent 6 years using that forgery to take something that was his gift to me." Her voice did not waver. "I am not interested in resolution. I am interested in the truth being established by a court of law." The silence at the gate was absolute. Hale's face went through something she had never seen on it before. She had seen his controlled versions of many things, of charm, of patience, of veiled threat. But she had never seen what moved across his face in this moment. which was the expression of a man who has spent 6 years maneuvering against an opponent he fundamentally underestimated and is only now at the fence of a Wyoming ranch on an October morning, understanding the full dimension of his error. "You'll spend everything fighting me," he said. His voice had dropped. "Whatever Farley costs, whatever the proceeding costs, you'll exhaust yourself." "I've already spent everything," Clara said. "I spent it in Missouri trying to hold what was mine with insufficient resources. I spent it on a stagecoach to Wyoming. I spent it on 6 weeks of building something from nothing." She looked at him steadily. "I don't have anything left to lose, Douglas. That's the part you've never understood about me. You kept thinking if you applied enough pressure, I'd run out of what it took to keep standing, but I haven't." Hale said nothing. "Farley will be in contact," Caleb said. "I'll ask you not to come to the ranch again." Hale stood at the gate for one more moment. Then he turned mounted and rode back the way he had come without another word. Clara watched him go. She watched until the sound of the horse faded entirely, and there was nothing on the road but October wind and the distant sound of cattle in the far pasture. Then she let out a breath that she had apparently been holding for 6 years. Caleb put his hand on her shoulder. Not asking, not explaining. Just there. "He's going to fight it," she said. "In the court. He won't accept this quietly." "Let him fight it in the court," Caleb said. "That's what the court is for." She put her hand over his briefly, and then she straightened and turned toward the house because there was still work to do, and the morning was moving, and the corral gate that needed its hinge replaced was not going to wait for a dramatic moment to resolve. Caleb followed her. And in the following of it, in that simple, ordinary act of a man turning toward the work his wife had already turned to, something was completed that had been building for 8 weeks without either of them naming it aloud. The letter from the Jefferson City Probate Court arrived 3 weeks later, and with it came the name of the person who had filed the anonymous complaint. Farley brought it in person. He drove out from Hatcher's Creek with the same battered case and the same coat, and the same quality of contained satisfaction that Clara was learning to read as his version of good news. He sat at the table. He opened the case. He produced the document. Clara read it. Her hands, which she had trained out of shaking years ago, did not shake. The complaint had been filed by a woman named Margaret Aldis, who was the wife of the attorney who had been Clara's last lawyer in Jefferson City before she ran out of money. James Aldis had died of fever the previous spring. His wife, going through his papers, had found the file he had kept on the Bennett estate matter, including materials he had gathered but never been able to act on before his death. Materials that included a handwriting analysis comparing the signature on the will amendment to known samples of Robert Bennett's writing. The analysis had been commissioned privately by James Aldis, paid for out of his own pocket, and kept in his files for 2 years while he tried to find a path to use it that didn't immediately destroy Clara's remaining legal standing. He had died before he found the path. His wife had found the analysis. And Margaret Aldis, who had apparently been a woman with her own considerable opinions about Douglas Hale's conduct, had taken the analysis to the probate court herself. Clara set the document down. She looked at the table. She thought about James Aldis, who had been a patient, careful man with a practice full of people who couldn't pay him what he was worth, who had spent 2 years working on her behalf in the margins of his professional life, and died before he saw what it might have built toward. "Mrs. Whitmore," Farley said quietly. She looked up. "With the handwriting analysis and the certified original will and the probate court's investigation now formally open," he said, "the foundation of Hale's claim is gone. He can fight the proceeding. He will fight it. Men like Hale always fight, but he cannot win it. Not against this." He paused. "You're going to get your parents' property back." The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb said nothing. He was looking at Clara with an expression she didn't try to read because she wasn't sure she could do it clearly right now with what was moving through her. "James Aldis never told me he was doing this," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. This was acceptable. She decided this was acceptable. "He may not have wanted to raise your hopes," Farley said. "He may not have wanted me to argue him out of it," Clara said, which was more accurate because she would have argued. She knew herself well enough to know that. Farley made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but acknowledged the truth of it. His wife knew what she was doing, he said. She knew exactly what she had, and she knew where to take it. Clara thought about Margaret Aldous, who she had met twice. A quiet woman who brought coffee to the attorney meetings and asked once how Clara was holding up in a way that carried genuine concern rather than social obligation. A woman who had gone through her dead husband's papers and found something he had built for someone he couldn't save and decided that it wasn't going to stay in a drawer. "I need to write to her," Clara said. "Yes," Farley said. "You do." He stayed for lunch and left in the early afternoon with his case and his coat and the particular purposeful energy of a man whose current case had just become considerably more interesting. At the door, he shook Caleb's hand and looked at Clara. "Your husband wrote to me because his father's land was in trouble," he said. "He didn't know he was also writing me the more interesting case." He paused. "I'm glad he wrote both things." "So am I," Clara said. Farley nodded once and was gone.
Gatong.
The winter came early that year, the way Wyoming winters sometimes did not, announcing themselves gradually, but arriving one morning with full authority, leaving no ambiguity about who was now in charge of the territory. Clara stood at the kitchen window in the first real snowfall of the season and watched it come down with the quiet total commitment of snow that intends to stay. And she thought about Missouri, where snow fell and melted and fell again, and the seasons negotiated with each other rather than settling the matter decisively. She heard Caleb come in from the barn behind her. She heard him pull off his coat and his boots with the specific sounds she had memorized, without meaning to. Over the weeks, the order of things, the brief pause between coat and boots, the way he moved through the house as though he had long since stopped thinking about where everything was and simply knew. "The cattle are settled," he said. "Gus sent word that his north pasture fence held through the night." "Good," Clara said. She did not move from the window. He came to stand beside her. They were quiet together, in the way they had been quiet together since the first night, not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have said enough of the necessary things that quiet is now a form of communication too. "I've been thinking," Clara said, "about what Harlan said." "Which part?" "That Tom Aldrich died knowing the survey was right." She paused. "That sometimes knowing is enough." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Is it for you?" She turned from the window to look at him. He was watching her with the expression she knew completely now, the one that had traveled from careful assessment, through respect, through something that neither of them had said aloud in quite the right way. Yet though the shape of it had been present between them for weeks, "James Aldous didn't see this coming together," she said. "He died with the file in his desk, and Margaret found it and took it to the court, and now Douglas Hale is going to face a proceeding that James spent 2 years building without ever knowing he'd finished it." She paused. "I keep thinking about what it is to do work that matters and not see it land. To put something in motion and trust that it goes where it needs to go. Like writing a letter to a woman you've never met," Caleb said quietly. She looked at him. "I wrote that letter," he said, "because the bank was pressing and the ranch was in trouble, and I needed a practical solution. I wasn't—" He paused. "I wasn't thinking about what it might become. I was thinking about what I needed, and I didn't know that what I wrote was also setting something in motion that I didn't have words for yet." Clara said, "Are you saying the letter was accidental?" "I'm saying the letter was honest," he said, "and that sometimes honesty sets things in motion that surprise you." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the snow came down with its Wyoming conviction, absolute and committed, and the ranch that his father had built, and nearly lost, and almost lost again, and had been taken back piece by piece through 6 weeks of work and fight, and choosing the ranch sat under the snow. The way honest things sit under difficulty, which is to say, it held. "Caleb," she said. "Yes. I love this ranch," she said. He waited. I love the north pasture and the corral gate that still needs its hinge replaced and the stove that draws wrong and the shelf that needed reorganizing and the east fence and the 63 cattle that are now 67. Because 2 of them calved last month and I was there for both of them at 4 in the morning because you came and got me and said I should see it. She paused. I love the kitchen table. I love that it was built to seat more people than currently sit at it and that someday, maybe it won't be. She looked at him. I love that you wrote me an honest letter and that when I arrived you took your hat off. Something moved across his face, complicated and complete and entirely his. Clara, he said. His voice was low. I have been... He stopped. I spent 4 years believing that the part of my life that mattered was over. That Elena's death was the last real thing that was going to happen to me, and everything after was just maintenance. Keeping the ranch. Getting through winters. He paused. I don't know exactly when that changed. I know it was gradual, and I know it was because of you. And I know that what I feel right now. He stopped again. He looked at the window, then back at her. I love you, Clara. I love you the way you love something you didn't know you needed until you had it, and now cannot imagine being without. The kitchen was very quiet. The snow fell outside with its enormous patience. Clara stepped forward and put her hand against the side of his face, and he put his hand over hers, the way he had at the corral, and they stood like that for a moment. That was not dramatic, and was not performed, and was more real than anything that had happened in that kitchen in years. I love you, she said. I have been trying to find the moment that felt right to say it, and I've decided there isn't a right moment. There's only the moment you're in. He turned his face slightly and pressed his lips to her palm, brief and certain, and then he straightened and looked at her with the expression that was his alone, the one she had been learning since the day at the depot, the one she now knew by heart. We still need to fix that hinge, he said. We do, she said. And the south window. And the south window, she agreed. And there's the Farley bill to settle, and the spring cattle count, and Gus mentioned the north fence needs looking at before February. Caleb, she said. Yes. We have time. He looked at her. We have time, she said again, and meant it in every way it could be meant for the fence and the window and the spring and the years and all of it, the whole accumulated and continuing possibility of 2 people who had found each other in a letter and built something real from the wreckage of what they'd each brought with them. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, and they stood at the kitchen window together and watched Wyoming winter come down over the land that was theirs, earned and fought for, and legally defended and chosen every acre of it, every morning of it, every day. The probate court in Jefferson City ruled in Clara's favor the following April. Douglas Hale's challenge collapsed under the weight of the handwriting analysis, and the certified original will, and the testimony of 3 witnesses in Missouri who had, once the court opened the proceeding, formally found the courage to say what they had known for years. Hale did not attend the final hearing. His attorney delivered the capitulation in writing in the specific language of a man who had calculated that further resistance was more expensive than the loss. Clara read the ruling at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning in April, with the south window finally fixed and letting in the spring air, and the sound of Caleb in the corral below, with the new horse that had arrived from Gus's cousin in March. She read it once. Then she walked to the window and called down to Caleb. He looked up. She held the paper out the window briefly. He saw it. He set down what he was doing and came inside and read it himself, and then set it on the table beside her coffee cup. He looked at her. It's done, he said. It's done, she said. They stood in the kitchen where everything had been decided and built and defended, and the spring light came through the fixed south window and fell across the table with its papers and its coffee cups and its accumulated history of mornings. What do you want to do today? Caleb asked. It was such an ordinary question, so completely ordinary that it required a moment to settle. Fix the north fence, Clara said, while the ground is still workable. Then the cattle count. Then supper. He nodded. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. She took her coat from beside it. They went out into the April morning together side by side onto land that was theirs, and had always been theirs, and would continue to be theirs because they had refused, both of them, in their different ways, before they ever met, to accept what powerful and dishonest people insisted was inevitable. Two people who had arrived at each other broken by different things and had, in the daily work of the life they'd built together, become something neither of them had been alone. Whole. That was the word. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, not free of the next fence that needed mending or the next winter that would test everything. But whole, which is what two people become when they choose each other, not once in a ceremony, but every day in the ordinary, irreplaceable work of being a life together. And on the land that James Whitmore built with 40 acres and a loan and a great deal of stubbornness, and that his son had nearly lost and had won back through honesty, and the love of a woman who knew how to read a ledger and a lie, and a human heart with equal precision on that land on that April morning, they walked out into everything that was still ahead of them, and they did not look back.